When European explorers first encountered the indigenous peoples of the Americas in the late 15th century, they faced a profound puzzle. Here were vast populations, millions of people, living across two continents that were completely unknown to European geography. These people had their own languages, cultures, civilizations, and histories stretching back thousands of years. For Europeans, whose understanding of human history was largely shaped by biblical narratives, this discovery posed urgent questions. If all humanity descended from Noah after the flood, how did people reach the Americas? When did they arrive? Were they mentioned in Scripture at all? The Bible made no clear reference to these continents or their inhabitants. Over the centuries that followed, numerous theories emerged attempting to reconcile biblical history with the existence of Native Americans. Some proposed they were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. Others suggested they were remnants of ancient civilizations mentioned in Scripture. Still others developed elaborate migration theories involving post-flood dispersal from the Tower of Babel. Today, we have powerful scientific tools that the early theorists could never have imagined. Archaeological excavations revealing thousands of years of human occupation, genetic analysis tracing ancestry through DNA, linguistic studies mapping language families, and geological evidence documenting ancient climate and geography. These tools have given us a detailed picture of when and how humans first reached the Americas. This video examines both perspectives, the biblical theories that emerged from the 16th through 19th centuries attempting to explain Native American origins, and the archaeological and genetic evidence that modern science has assembled. We'll look at what early Europeans believed, why they believed it, and what we actually know today about the first Americans. When Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean in 1492, he believed he had reached the East Indies, hence his term Indians for the people he encountered. This initial misunderstanding reveals how completely unprepared Europeans were to conceptualize entirely new continents inhabited by peoples unknown to classical or biblical geography. As the scale of the Americas became apparent, European scholars and clergy faced a theological problem. Christian doctrine held that all humans descended from Adam and Eve, and more recently from Noah's 3 sons after the flood. The Bible provided what was understood as a complete genealogy of nations in Genesis chapter 10. But this genealogy made no mention of the Americas. The most prominent early theory proposed that Native Americans were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. This idea gained significant traction in the 16th and 17th centuries. The theory held that when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, they deported 10 of the 12 tribes, who then disappeared from biblical history. Various scholars proposed that these lost tribes had somehow migrated to the Americas. The Spanish priest Bartolomé de las Casas, famous for defending Native Americans against Spanish cruelty, nevertheless believed they descended from Israelite origins. The Portuguese Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel wrote a treatise in 1650 arguing that Native Americans were descendants of these lost tribes, basing his argument on supposed similarities between Hebrew and Native American practices. What evidence did proponents cite? They pointed to perceived similarities in religious practices. Some Native American tribes practiced ritual purification, had temple structures, and observed what seemed like monotheistic beliefs. They noted physical features they claimed resembled Middle Eastern peoples. Some claimed to find linguistic similarities between Native American languages and Hebrew. Reports of tribes observing something resembling a Sabbath or practicing circumcision were seized upon as proof. Other theories emerged as alternatives. Some scholars proposed Native Americans descended from Phoenician sailors who had crossed the Atlantic in ancient times. The Phoenicians were known as exceptional seafarers, and proponents argued they could have reached the Americas centuries before Columbus. This theory pointed to supposed similarities between Native American pyramids and Mediterranean architecture. Another popular theory connected Native Americans to the lost continent of Atlantis. Plato's dialogues mentioned Atlantis as an advanced civilization that sank into the ocean. Some theorists proposed that survivors of Atlantis had populated the Americas, explaining both Native American civilizations and their isolation from the Old World. A more scripturally grounded theory focused on the dispersion of peoples after the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11 describes how God confused human language and scattered people across the earth. Some scholars propose that during this dispersion, certain groups migrated eastward through Asia and eventually crossed into the Americas. This had the advantage of fitting within biblical chronology while explaining the journey through known continents. The Book of Mormon, published in 1830 by Joseph Smith, presented an elaborate narrative claiming that Native Americans descended from Israelites who sailed to the Americas around 600 BC. According to this text, these migrants, called Lamanites and Nephites, fought wars and built civilizations in the Americas, with Jesus Christ appearing to them after his resurrection. The Lamanites, according to Mormon theology, were the principal ancestors of Native Americans. What united most of these theories was the attempt to fit Native American origins within a biblical time frame. Young Earth chronology, derived from biblical genealogies, suggested the Earth was only about 6,000 years old, with the flood occurring around 2400 BC. Any theory about Native American origins had to account for their presence in the Americas within this compressed time frame. These theories also reflected European attitudes of the period. Many proponents saw Native Americans as degraded descendants of more civilized peoples, whether Israelites, Phoenicians, or others. This framing served to justify European colonization and missionary efforts, positioning Europeans as bringing Native Americans back to their lost heritage. Modern archaeology tells a dramatically different story about the peopling of the Americas, one based on physical evidence accumulated over more than a century of excavation and analysis. The current scientific consensus holds that humans first entered the Americas during the last ice age, crossing from Siberia to Alaska via a land bridge called Beringia. This wasn't a narrow strip of land. At its maximum extent, Beringia was a vast subcontinent, up to 1,000 miles wide, connecting Asia and North America. It existed because Ice Age glacier locked up so much water that sea levels dropped by over 300 feet, exposing the continental shelf. The timing of this migration has been refined considerably over recent decades. For much of the 20th century, the Clovis first model dominated. Named after distinctive stone tools first found near Clovis, New Mexico, this theory proposed that humans arrived around 13,000 years ago. Clovis points, beautifully crafted spear points with distinctive fluting, were found across North America, suggesting rapid dispersal by skilled hunters pursuing Ice Age megafauna like mammoth and giant bison. However, recent discoveries have pushed back the timeline significantly. Multiple sites across the Americas have yielded evidence of human presence before Clovis. At Monteverde in southern Chile, archaeologist Tom Dillahay excavated a site with clear evidence of human occupation dated to at least 14,500 years ago, more than 1,000 miles from the Bering Land Bridge and more than 1,000 years before Clovis. The site preserved remains of wooden structures, stone tools, and even medicinal plants, indicating an established way of life. In New Mexico, footprints discovered at White Sands National Park have been dated to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. These footprints, preserved in ancient lake sediments, show adults and children walking across a landscape that would later become desert. If these dates hold up to ongoing scrutiny, they suggest humans reached North America much earlier than previously thought. Other pre-Clovis sites include Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, with possible occupation as early as 16,000 years ago, and Buttermilk Creek in Texas, dated to around 15,500 years ago. Each new discovery refines our understanding, generally pushing human arrival earlier. The route of entry has also become more complex. The traditional model proposed that humans waited in Beringia until the great ice sheets covering Canada melted enough to create an ice-free corridor, allowing passage into the interior of North America. However, geological evidence suggests this corridor may not have been passable until after humans had already reached sites south of the ice sheets. This has led to the coastal migration theory. According to this model, early Americans moved south along the Pacific coast, traveling by boat and utilizing marine resources. The coastal route would have been ice-free earlier than the interior corridor, and it would explain how humans reached South America so quickly. Unfortunately, most evidence for this route now lies underwater, submerged when sea levels rose after the Ice Age, making it difficult to confirm directly. Who were these first Americans? They were anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, skilled hunters and gatherers adapted to harsh environments. They brought with them sophisticated stone tool technology, knowledge of fire, and complex social structures. They entered a landscape filled with animals that had never encountered human hunters: giant ground sloths, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, giant beavers, and enormous birds. The rapid extinction of these megafauna shortly after human arrival has led to the overkill hypothesis, the idea that human hunting contributed significantly to their demise. While climate change at the end of the Ice Age certainly played a role, the timing of extinctions closely correlates with human arrival in different regions, suggesting humans were at least partly responsible. Archaeological sites across the Americas document the subsequent development of Native American cultures. In the Ohio River Valley, the Adena and Hopewell cultures built enormous earthen mounds beginning around 3,000 years ago. At Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, a sophisticated urban center emerged around 1000 AD, with a population that may have reached 20,000, larger than London at the time. In the southwest, the ancestral Pueblones constructed elaborate cliff dwellings and developed advanced agricultural systems in challenging desert environments. In Central and South America, civilizations emerged with writing systems, mathematics, astronomy, and monumental architecture, the Olmec, Maya, Aztec, and Inca being the most famous. The diversity of Native American cultures by the time of European contact was extraordinary. They spoke hundreds of distinct languages, practiced varied subsistence strategies from Arctic hunting to tropical agriculture, and developed political systems ranging from small bands to complex empires. This diversity reflects thousands of years of independent development in varied environments. Archaeological evidence also reveals long-distance trade networks. Obsidian from Yellowstone has been found in Ohio burial mounds. Copper from the Great Lakes reached the Gulf Coast. Seashells from the Pacific and Atlantic coasts traveled to interior regions. These networks demonstrate that Native American societies were not isolated groups but interconnected communities engaged in exchange across vast distances. The material record is remarkably rich. Pottery, baskets, textiles, tools, ornaments, and human remains have been recovered from thousands of sites. Each artifact tells part of the story: changing tool technologies, evolving artistic styles, dietary shifts, population movements, and cultural transformations. The most revolutionary insights into Native American origins have come from genetic analysis, a tool unavailable until the late 20th century. DNA analysis can trace ancestral relationships and migration patterns with remarkable precision, providing evidence that archaeology alone cannot offer. Modern genetic studies consistently show that Native Americans are most closely related to peoples of Northeast Asia, particularly populations in Siberia. This confirms the Beringia migration route proposed by archaeologists. The genetic signatures indicate that Native Americans descend from a population that lived in Siberia during the Ice Age. The genetics are complex, but several key findings have emerged. Most Native Americans belong to mitochondrial DNA haplogroups A, B, C, D, and X. Haplogroups A through D are found in Asian populations, clearly linking Native Americans to Asian ancestry. Haplogroup X is more puzzling. It's found in both Native Americans and some European and Middle Eastern populations, which initially led to speculation about ancient transatlantic contact. However, further analysis suggests haplogroup X arrived in the Americas via the same Beringia route, with the Asian population that carried it having since disappeared or been genetically swamped by later migrations. Y chromosome analysis, which traces paternal lineages, tells a similar story. The dominant Y chromosome haplogroups in Native Americans, Q and C, are found in Siberian populations. Haplogroup Q, in particular, links directly to populations in Central Asia and Siberia. Genetic analysis has also revealed the complexity of Native American population history. Rather than a single migration, evidence suggests multiple waves of migration from Asia to the Americas. The initial migration brought the ancestors of most Native Americans. Later migrations brought the ancestors of Nadene speakers, including the Navajo and Apache. The most recent Asian migrants were the ancestors of the Inuit and Aleut peoples, who arrived only a few thousand years ago. Ancient DNA extracted from skeletal remains has been particularly illuminating. His DNA shows that he is ancestral to modern Native Americans, confirming continuity between the earliest Americans and contemporary indigenous populations. A particularly significant find was Kennewick Man, a skeleton discovered in Washington state in 1996 and initially dated to about 9,000 years ago. Early analysis of his skull suggested he might have resembled Polynesians or even Europeans more than modern Native Americans, leading to controversial claims that the earliest Americans might not be ancestors of today's Native Americans. However, detailed genetic analysis published in 2015 definitively showed that Kennewick Man was more closely related to modern Native Americans than to any other population. He has since been repatriated and reburied according to Native American wishes. The genetic evidence has also been used to test specific alternative theories. DNA analysis shows no genetic connection between Native Americans and Jewish populations, effectively disproving the lost tribes theory. There is no genetic signature suggesting Phoenician, Egyptian, or other Middle Eastern ancestry in pre-Columbian Native American populations. Similarly, genetic evidence does not support the Book of Mormon's claim of Israelite migration to the Americas around 600 BC. The Lamanites, described in Mormon theology as principal ancestors of Native Americans, would have left a clear genetic signature of Middle Eastern ancestry. No such signature exists in any Native American population examined. Some Mormon scholars have responded by suggesting that Lamanites were a small group whose genetic contribution was diluted by mixing with larger pre-existing populations. However, this represents a significant revision of traditional Mormon teaching, which held that Lamanites were the primary ancestors of Native Americans. Genetic analysis has also shed light on population sizes and movements within the Americas. Evidence suggests a population bottleneck, a dramatic reduction in population size, occurred among the founding population in Beringia before dispersal into the Americas. This means the initial population that spread throughout the Americas was relatively small, perhaps only a few thousand individuals. After entering the Americas, populations grew rapidly and diversified genetically as they spread into different environments. By the time of European contact, genetic diversity among Native Americans reflected thousands of years of separation and adaptation to diverse environments from the Arctic to Patagonia. The story told by genetics is remarkably consistent with archaeological evidence. Both point to Asian origins, Ice Age migration via Beringia, and subsequent diversification within the Americas over many thousands of years. Where they differ is in the level of detail. Genetics can trace population relationships and movements that leave no archaeological trace. Linguistic analysis provides another independent line of evidence about Native American origins and history. At the time of European contact, Native Americans spoke hundreds of distinct languages, grouped into numerous language families as different from each other as English is from Chinese. The most widely accepted linguistic classification recognizes three major groups in the Americas. The largest is Amerindian, which includes the majority of Native American languages throughout North and South America. The second is Nadene, spoken by various groups in Western North America and including Navajo and Apache. The third is Eskimo-Aleut, spoken by Arctic peoples. Some linguists propose that these three groups represent three separate waves of migration from Asia, with Amerindian speakers arriving first, Nadene speakers second, and Eskimo-Aleut speakers most recently. This linguistic model roughly aligns with genetic evidence, though the details remain debated. Attempts to link Native American languages to Old World language families have generally failed. No credible linguistic connection has been established between Native American languages and Hebrew, despite claims made by proponents of the Lost Tribes theory. The supposed similarities cited in early accounts, a few words that sound vaguely similar, do not represent genuine linguistic relationships. Languages can have superficially similar-sounding words by pure coincidence without any historical connection. Similarly, no linguistic evidence supports connections to Phoenician, Egyptian, or other ancient Mediterranean languages. The structure, vocabulary, and grammar of Native American languages are fundamentally distinct from Semitic and other Middle Eastern language families. However, anthropologists recognize that many cultural practices emerge independently in different societies because they address universal human needs and experiences. Ritual purification makes practical and symbolic sense in many contexts. Temple structures are a common way to designate sacred spaces. Flood stories appear in many cultures worldwide, likely because catastrophic floods are memorable traumatic events that get incorporated into oral traditions. When examined in detail, Native American cultural practices show no evidence of derivation from Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, or other Old World sources. Native American religious systems, social organizations, artistic traditions, and mythologies are distinctly their own, developed over millennia of independent cultural evolution. Some cultural practices do show connections across the Bering Strait. Certain motifs in art, shamanistic practices, and even some aspects of mythology show similarities between Siberian and Native American cultures. This cultural continuity supports the archaeological and genetic evidence of an Asian origin. The development of agriculture in the Americas occurred independently of Old World agriculture and involved completely different crops. While the Middle East domesticated wheat, barley, and legumes, Native Americans domesticated maize, beans, squash, and potatoes. The techniques and timing of agricultural development were also distinct. This independent development of agriculture is powerful evidence for long isolation from Old World influence. The evidence from archaeology, genetics, linguistics, and cultural anthropology paints a consistent picture that fundamentally contradicts the biblical theories proposed in earlier centuries. Native Americans are not descendants of lost tribes of Israel, Phoenician sailors, or post-flood migrants from Babel. They are descendants of Ice Age hunters from Siberia who entered the Americas at least 15,000 years ago, possibly earlier. This timeline presents obvious conflicts with a literal reading of biblical chronology. Young Earth chronology, calculated from biblical genealogies, places creation around 4000 BC and the flood around 2400 BC. The archaeological and genetic evidence for human presence in the Americas extends back 3 to 4 times further than a literal biblical timeline allows for all of human history. Different groups respond to this conflict in different ways. Some religious communities reject the scientific evidence entirely, maintaining that a literal reading of Scripture must take precedence over scientific findings. They might argue that the dating methods are flawed, that God created the world with an appearance of age, or that the flood dramatically altered geological and archaeological records. Others adopt a more figurative interpretation of Genesis, viewing the creation and flood accounts as theological rather than historical narratives. This approach allows acceptance of scientific evidence while maintaining religious faith. Many mainstream Christian denominations take this position, seeing no necessary conflict between evolution, deep time, and religious belief. The Mormon Church has faced particular challenges, given the Book of Mormon's specific claims about Israelite ancestry for Native Americans. The Church has gradually modified its position, with recent editions of the Book of Mormon changing language from principal ancestors to among the ancestors of Native Americans. Many Mormon scholars now accept that other populations lived in the Americas before and alongside the Book of Mormon peoples, though this remains a sensitive topic within the faith. From a scientific perspective, the evidence is clear and converging. Independent lines of inquiry, archaeology, genetics, linguistics, and paleoclimatology all point to the same general picture. This convergence is what gives scientists confidence in the model. When completely different methods of investigation reach consistent conclusions, those conclusions are likely correct. Over thousands of years, they develop hundreds of distinct cultures and languages, built cities and monuments, domesticated crops, and created civilizations. By the time Europeans arrived, the Americas were home to tens of millions of people living in sophisticated societies. The tragic impact of European diseases, which killed up to 90% of the Native American population in some regions, nearly erased this achievement from history. The question of Native American origins reflects a larger tension between religious tradition and scientific inquiry. For centuries, Europeans attempted to fit Native Americans into biblical narratives because Scripture provided their framework for understanding human history. The theories they developed, lost tribes, Phoenician sailors, Atlantean survivors, reflected both genuine intellectual puzzlement and the cultural assumptions of their time. Modern science has provided answers those early theorists could not have imagined. Through archaeology, genetics, linguistics, and related fields, we now understand that Native Americans descended from Ice Age migrants from Asia who reached the Americas at least 15,000 years ago. This understanding is based on multiple, converging lines of evidence, all telling the same basic story. This scientific account does not diminish the significance of Native American history and cultures. If anything, it deepens our appreciation for what was achieved. The peopling of the Americas was an extraordinary feat of human exploration and adaptation. The first Americans crossed from Siberia during the Ice Age, dispersed throughout the Americas, and over thousands of years created the diverse cultures that Europeans encountered. That is the story the evidence tells, and it is a story worth knowing and respecting. Thank you for watching.